Lyrically, I think dialect has like a message you want to convey maybe in your music. Am I right? Is there something you like a deeper meaning you want to put
Yeah,
out?
I mean, it's I don't know. I guess it's a message. It's more. I mean, it's just my viewpoint and my. I mean, the best way I could put it is that this project has always been how I get all my anger, my frustration, like everything I want to say. I get it out that way. So really, it's been more therapy for me than anything. I'm always humbled that other people find meaning in what I've written in the songs that we do, and I think that's the beautiful thing about music is that it connects people, you know, from all different types of cultures all around the world. Obviously, in the world that we're living today, I think my messages have gotten a little more like, you know, like club to the head, just to reiterate what I've been saying for the last 25 years. But yeah, you know, I mean, like the messages are there. At the same time, I want people to do a little thinking for themselves, and I want them to kind of discover them themselves. It's not about me telling you how to think. It's more about me presenting how I think, and if you agree with me, then nod your head with me. You know?
The big difference is all the noise, I think. Very noisy, abrasive record.
It has this very dirty, grimy feel a lot of the time, with this incredibly rich sonic background.
I hate to compare it because I saw so many comments on the YouTube video that I originally looked it up, people comparing them to Death Grips.
If y'all niggas say I look like MC Ride one more fucking time.
Back in the early 2010s, experimental hip-hop had a surge in popularity in the music scene, which all came from a band named Death Grips. Their influence when it came to music was so big that almost anything alternative now with a rapper in it was usually somehow linked back to Death Grips, even if there was no involvement. Now don't get me wrong, Death Grips did a lot and inspired a multitude of other underground artists to find their own sound. In fact, that's kind of the main appeal of Death Grips. Their sound is so off the wall that it's hard to tell sometimes where they even got it from. Well, I'm here to tell you that although Death Grips popularized it, this weird genre-bending mix of sounds was actually pioneered by another experimental hip-hop group dating all the way back to the 90s. And when I say experimental, I don't mean like MF Doom or like Company Flow, I guess. That's more abstract in my opinion. I'm talking about the kind of ones that have such an out-of-this-world beat to it that it would be hard to call it hip-hop without the drum loops. That's what Death Grips were in 2011, kinda, but as you can guess, there was another hip-hop group that predated them by 13 years back in 1998. That's almost 30 years old from the time of recording this video, which is kind of sad. Anyways, this hip-hop group named Dälek released their first experimental hip-hop album all the way back in 1998 called I don't know if I can say that. If we ignore the title though, the music from their first album contains many elements of what Death Grips would do almost 15 years later. There was loud and abrasive production, a rapper spitting rhymes over it, intricate and heavy lyrics. It's so close to Death Grips that I don't even know why I'm calling it Death Grips. It should be the other way around, that Death Grips have a similar sound to Dälek. The similarities between the two are so eerie that most people start to question if Death Grips were inspired by Dälek or not. So, were they? Well, the short answer is no, but the longer answer would be maybe. Again, the music is very similar, but to understand why that's the case, we first need to figure out how Dälek got their sound in the first place. The backstory of Dälek isn't exactly well documented. This was all just information I found in interviews and stuff, but I can tell you that it all started in 1976 from a man named Will Brooks, aka Dialect, or MC Dialect. He grew up in Newark, New Jersey, which is not too far from New York, where hip-hop originally started. His parents listened to all kinds of music at home, even noting that his mother was into the Beatles and Spanish music. His biggest influence though, coming from Will Brooks himself, was his cousins, who were DJs. He even states that if it wasn't for them, he wouldn't even be into hip-hop. This was mainly because they were the first ones to introduce Will to different rap groups, most notably Run DMC, Public Enemy, De La Soul, and other local groups around the area. He also had an older cousin who was a metalhead, recommend some bands for him to listen to. He bought his first turntable in 1989 when he was 13, and would eventually go on to be a DJ. He joined a rap group with another DJ and two rappers until one left and the other suggested that he should try taking his place. So throughout high school, Will said to have wrote awful and terrible rhymes in his free time to get better. Although this is probably embarrassing for him to look back on, this was actually a pivotal moment in Will's life since this was the time he'd made the conscious decision to follow his passion and make music. He'd attend William Patterson University for a bit, not really doing much except gaining knowledge wherever he can, and apparently nodding his head at one kid that he always walked past in class every day for like the entire time he was there. He'd received some grant money, which he used to purchase an MPC 3000, which is basically a sampler, before dropping out of uni to make music. He wouldn't be completely alone for this though, since he would make a friend before leaving, who would eventually become the second member of Dälek at the time. The other guy was a musician slash producer named Aight Amin Momin, also known as Octopus. He grew up in New Jersey as well with Indian parents and took an early interest in music at a young age. He said, quote, "I had an organ and a recorder when I was 5, then I started playing trumpet when I was 9, and eventually switched over to guitar when I was 12 or 13. From there, I picked up drums as well and started playing in a bunch of different hardcore bands through high school. When I went to college, I sort of got tired of all the old bands and music I was involved with and got more into the recording side of things." Octopus would go on to work with Gurren Blandston Records and be in the studio with jazz, punk, and metal bands, before eventually doing the recording for Will Brooks in his solo records. Will and Aight would bond after working for about a year, eventually opening up about the music they listened to, exchanging and discussing artists such as My Bloody Valentine, Public Enemy, Nas, The Beach Boys, and a few local bands around them. They both enjoyed the sounds of punk, metal, and anything hardcore, but also enjoyed the deep lyricism of hip-hop, so they decided, fuck it, let's put 2 and 2 together and be a band. Aight suggested using Will Brooks' rapper name, Dälek, as the group name, and they would both work on a few instrumentals and songs together before going out and performing them with other bands under the record label. Their step in music, although almost revolutionary, didn't receive as much praise as one would believe, as they would usually clear the room when they were performing.
We were playing underground shows to begin with where there wasn't that many people to start with. Say if there was 30 people, by the time the middle of our first song, there'd be like 5 people left. So that was like a regular occurrence for us.
Before they officially started though, Aight thought about bringing one more person in the group, someone that was also part of Gurren Blandston Records, more specifically, All Natural Lemon and Lime flavors.
He's like, I know who we gotta bring in on this project. And he's like, it's my boy from this band, All Natural Lemon Lime Flavors. I was like, oh, word. I'm like, bring him in, man. I definitely want to meet him. Kid comes in, and it's that same kid that I was nodding to, like, 4 years earlier. It's almost like, I met both of them at the school we went to. And it was like, to me, like, that's the reason I went to that school, was just to meet the people I met.
Now, Joshua Booth is a really interesting part of the group because I don't know where to find him in anything. Will Brooks and Aight are easy, but for Joshua Booth, he's just never there. Like, this isn't Joshua Booth, this is Mike Manteco. We ain't seen this guy till like later in the timeline, okay? Joshua is still equally as important though, since his band, All Natural Lemon and Lime Flavors, were popular for their shoegaze music. My Bloody Valentine were the pioneers of this and a big influence on Will Brooks, so having Joshua Booth who was good at that kind of stuff was a necessity for their group. I know it's the guy with the guitar and the long hair, so I'm gonna take a huge guess and say this is probably Joshua Booth, but whatever, these are the main 3, cool. They would go on to work together for a bit before throwing all their stuff into one album titled, and Necros in 1998. It was mainly produced by Will and Aight, but Joshua Booth has said to have added some extra parts, which I do believe, but I couldn't find any good sources to prove the validity of any of this, but yeah, that's how they mainly got to where they are pre-debut. And now with that out of the way, we can finally dive into this album and see how experimental they got. Their first album only really contained 5 tracks, that being Swollen Tongue Bums, 3 Rocks Blessed, Images of 44 Casings, The Untraveled Road, and Praise Be the Man. The record was re-released in 2024 and includes an additional 6 tracks. One was an actual song, another one was a remix, while the other 3 are all instrumentals. The last one, Sweetwood Sound Session 404, isn't really much of a song and more just a recording of them in the studio talking about a song in particular. Although I do wish it was more cohesive because there's a lot of stuff that's just up to interpretation. But anyways, the album starts off with its first and most popular song. It's a little off the wall for the first minute, but it's nothing too crazy. The lyrics, although cryptid, can be sort of followed. The tone of Will Brooks continuously shifts throughout the song to either sound angry, informative, or commanding in a matter of like 15 seconds. It's really intense, and it doesn't seem to stop there as it cuts to this wild and ethereal sounding bridge after the chorus. And what's crazy to me is that the song doesn't even end there, with that being the weird part, because after that they add what sounds like another song on top of it at the same time. Just remember, this is all from the first track, I'm not doing anything else with this. And if you think that's too much, it immediately hits you with the chorus again a few seconds later. There's so many fluctuations and different sounds, and even when I remember parts of this song, I always forget it's just this one song in particular and not a bunch of other songs. It makes it a good listen though in my opinion, since it delivers both lyrically and instrumentally. The song ends with an extended chorus before slowly fading out, and that's it. That's the first song. It's crazy listening back to this if you remember that this is the same year that The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, Aquemini, and It's Dark in Hell all came out. You can see why a lot of people weren't too happy to hear them when they performed on stage during the time. Their next song, Three Rocks Blessed, is actually much more calmer than the first. For the verses, you can see Will Brooks doesn't go heavy on profanities, keeping his lyrics more abstract as he shares his thoughts on hip-hop and its growing industry. At the 3:05 mark, a sample is played talking about mental pain for almost a minute that no one has been able to find, before going back to the instrumental. Eventually at the 4:30 mark, tablas come in and take over the instrumental. I'm pretty sure for most of the song too, there was a sitar being played, both of these being instruments of Indian origin, which makes sense for Octopus to use since he has spoken about using that kind of sound due to growing up with Indian parents. The drums fade at the 6:30 mark and so does the song too. It's pretty long but I still enjoy it. The first 3 minutes are worth listening to in my opinion, but other than that it's pretty good. Now the third song, Images of 44 Casings, is an interesting one, mainly because it's 12 minutes long. Why is this song 12 minutes long? It has a pretty eerie instrumental, and the drums don't even kick in until about a minute later. Will Brooks doesn't even rap until 3 minutes and some seconds in, and it feels more like talking if I'm being honest, before going back to the instrumental for a couple of more minutes. Will raps not too long after in a very long second verse. This just repeats again before going into the third verse, which is just again Will talking pessimistically. At the 7:30 mark, it breaks into something a little more uplifting as the drums kick in again for an extended outro. Overall, it's not too bad of a song, kinda long in some parts, but it's alright. The lyrics are very cryptic, but I think it's about Will reminiscing on how he found and created his own rap style, since dälek to him is just another way of saying dialect. The next song following up this one is called The Untraveled Road. It starts off with a sample of people talking about a story of someone having their kidney stolen after passing out from a date rape drug. I'm not going to go into detail of it, but it's a pretty crazy story. It lasts for like a minute before getting into the actual song, and honestly, if you just like exclude the outro, it's probably one of my favorites off the album. It's kind of jarring in a good way, especially with the samples they use. Just listen to this, man. It kind of reminds me of Scaring the Hose by JPEG and Danny Brown, but like much more dirtier and longer. Not as long as that last song though, this is only 5 minutes. I'm pretty burnt out now, so hopefully the next song isn't too long, and oh my god. Praise Be the Man is their last song on the album, and the longest too, clocking in at 14 minutes, which is weird because in the CD track listing and some uploads it's 12 minutes. Either way though, it's ridiculously long. It starts off with these weird sounds of what I'm guessing is a sample of a girl singing with some noises coming from the left and right ear. The drums come in and Will Brooks raps. It doesn't sound too bad, just very out there, especially for 1998. You can barely hear him in the song, but the main instrumental almost has no changes. The music just comes in with these really random sounds. The main chorus talks about Will Brooks seeing a dead person and wondering if he could fit in his shoes, a more metaphorical way of saying that he could be in the same situation. His rapping, I wouldn't say is everywhere, but he isn't someone that necessarily follows a narrative in his poems. It's more just long thoughts of his written in rhymes, ranging from dissing radio-friendly rap, talking about himself, and this whole second and third verse, which you can have fun dissecting. It'd take way too long for me to break this down. Past the 6 minute mark, the drums are no longer there. I think a train goes by a few times, but then another sample of spoken word plays before the 9 minute mark. More weird sounds play. At the 12 minute mark, the spoken word sample is reversed. The instrumental continues, although more and more of it is taken away until eventually the reverse sample plays one more time, and finally, that's the end of the song. The only thing I can say to that is, what the fuck did I just listen to? I obviously can't find any reviews of this album during its release date since it was so underground, but Octopus did mention this in an interview and even admitted that they were pretty out of place. At the time, we just wanted to play, and there was literally no scene or audience for our sound, so we just jumped on every type of show we could get. From hip-hop to indie to punk to basement/VFW shows to noise, anything. We were on a mission. We definitely felt like we had something that no one else was doing and just wanted to get the music out to as many people as possible. Will Brooks definitely shared the same sentiment. I can't say that these are the exact thoughts he had when making music back then, but it was definitely something similar. Hopefully their first album gave you a good idea on how their music sounds, because obviously with how YouTube works with copyright, I cannot be teasing their music as much as I did before. Over the next 2 years, dälek would go on to perform wherever they could around New Jersey, including 3 or 4 shows with a band called Lovage. One of the members, Mike Patton, took a clear interest in the band and would usually be watching from the sidelines whenever they performed. Mike Patton was already pretty influential in rock and experimental music, even back then, and would eventually go on to ask dälek if they could play the opening show for one of his bands. Will Brooks was like, sure, and so they would go on to perform in Europe as well a week later. It seemed to go pretty well, and from there on, Mike would ask dälek if they would like to join his record label, that being Ipecac Records. Will wasn't too sure, but Aight, being the one that's into bands, was ecstatic to join, and so Will was like, alright, and they joined. Some time later though, in the 2000s, dälek and electronic duo Techno Animal would collab to release an EP named Megaton/Classical Homicide, Megaton being the Techno Animal song and Classical Homicide being the dälek song. It's a pretty interesting listen, to say the least. It starts off with Megaton before switching to Classical Homicide remix, and then to the original song itself, before ending with a remix of Megaton. It's nothing too crazy for their standards, except for the fact that Classical Homicide was a song not from their first album, but their second one 2 years later, that being From Filthy Tongue of Gods and Griots. It's their most iconic album of theirs, and it's probably one of the most experimental hip-hop albums ever made, especially in the 2000s.
I was like, are you fucking serious? This came out before Lump Below? What the fuck?
If you told me that this came out last week, I would have believed you. God, what the fuck, man? People were doing this shit?
It starts off ridiculously heavy with Spiritual Healing, an intense and almost jarring track, similar to Swollen Tongue Bums, but even more intense. The music here definitely feels a lot less aimless than their first album, not saying that to diss Will Brooks or anything, but you can definitely tell that they had a clear concept and themes that they wanted to explore. The lyrics are a lot more targeted at religion, which I guess makes sense given the title of the album. It even has some bars that still remain prevalent today. It's nice to know that politics haven't changed a bit, huh? It is a really good track, but like I said before, the instrumental is jarring, so proceed with caution. Speak Volumes comes after, less intense, but still meaningful track that I would highly recommend listening to. The lyrics dive deep on art and how much that has been sucked out dry by the music industry. The instrumental really goes off on this song, moving away from hip-hop into this ascending, ethereal soundscape that I've never really heard any other song do before. From Mole Hills comes on after, another less intense track that is probably the closest song you'll find that sounds like normal hip-hop. It doesn't necessarily make it bad or anything. It's pretty good, but come on, I ain't trying to hear the normal shit. Antichristo comes on as more of an interlude. You can definitely tell that Christianity is a core theme of this album, since this interlude is simply a free-spoken Bible verse in a different language with some dark ambient instrumentals. Hold Tight comes in with a mix of hip-hop and techno, I think. The lyrics focus on stereotypes and conformity in the rap scene and how much he hates it, carrying a tone that conveys a sense of underlying rage, which he seems to refrain from expressing in a more raw emotion. For now. The next song is Heads, another interlude where if you're new to these guys and don't know how to pronounce this word, then they'll be happy to repeat saying dälek a total of 33 times as the instrumental plays eerily in the background, until some really distorted drums kick in on the second half of the track. Following this is one of their more longer songs, Black Smoke Rises, lasting 12 minutes, and I know this is gonna sound like Praise Be the Man again, but seriously, the song is actually like really good. I wouldn't listen to it again, but it was definitely an experience. The track is kind of distressing, which I guess makes sense, because if we take this album as a story, you can see Will goes off on religion, music and culture, the hip-hop scene, and its conformity to the mainstream. He's getting his frustrations out, but there's no closure to it, and I think this song does a great job at explaining his confused state. It carries a sense of existential dread where you're kind of just watching something burn in front of you, but you can't really do anything about it. Wouldn't listen to it again though, unless I'm in the right mood. So what does Will Brooks do when he's in the dark? Well, he looks within, and that's what Trampled Brethren does. There's still disses here and there, but it's no longer the main point. The instrumental, by the way, goes crazy. Aight went fucking off on making this sound like some Indian spiritual awakening. Voices of Either comes on later, having the shortest lyric section, but that's mainly because every lyric website I could find had no idea what Will Brooks is saying on the second verse. They kind of mess around with the voices, but Will Brooks seems to come in with a more confident sounding tone, understanding what he wants to be in this art form, and again, The instrumental is so good. I'd give it a recommendation, but it is still pretty intense. But I mean, come on, it's experimental, of course it's gonna be intense. The next track is Forever Close My Eyes, which is probably the most iconic track in Dälek, and probably up there for one of the best songs ever made. I'm being genuine, by the way. I can only really describe it as like Will Brooks literally passing away, and these are just the last few minutes he experiences as he reminisces on his entire life. It's pretty ambitious for their second album, by the way, I'm just saying. But no, seriously, like, if you look at the track list, you can see, like, instrumentally, it's insane. Like, Octopus is already like a powerhouse in music, but they go way above and beyond for this song with all these other musicians working on it. There's a short 3-minute interview with Will Brooks, and there's literally a section just talking about that song in particular. That's how crazy it is.
I've never played. There's a song called Forever Close My Eyes on one of our albums on, I believe it's on Filthy Tongue, that, it's just very personal, and we've just, I don't even know if we made it a conscious decision not to play it, but we've just never played it, and at this point I kind of like it that way, so I don't think we ever will play it, but that's probably the most important song.
To sum it up, it's an 11 out of 10. I usually hate using the word peak, but I feel like this song deserves it, which is funny because we still have one more song off though, Classical Homicide. I already showed it before, but it's kind of like a cool extra send-off, and it's probably my personal favorite off the album, mainly because of the last part, but I'll leave that for you guys to listen to. Either way though, it's an amazing album, and I definitely recommend it if you're into experimental hip-hop. Over the next few years, Dälek would continue to make more albums, further expanding their discography throughout the 2000s, 2010s, and even in the 2020s as time went on. Before continuing off their second album, I'd also like to mention that after researching, I found a Spanish reviewing website that mentioned 41 Shots as an unreleased track. I didn't even know this existed until now, and it's just as weird as anything else they've made. Aside from that, there's also the Ruined collab EP with Kid 606, who's another weird ambient music guy, and also Dälek vs Velma, which I could only find on YouTube to exist. Also in Techno Animal's Lost album, Brotherhood of the Bomb, Dälek appears rapping in the Lost track Hell. I didn't even research for this, I was just listening to Techno Animal and found them in the track. In Classical Homicide, Dälek makes a reference to Faust, which was an experimental band in Germany which obviously influenced them. This was back with the collab track, and one of their booking agents in Germany sent it to Faust, and to their surprise, they really enjoyed it. So much so that they asked Dälek if they would come over to make music, which they obviously did.
You know, recorded with them, and then Joachim kind of went through the tapes and like made these mixes, and I think there might be like maybe like 6 or 7 different versions of that album that he kept sending us, and then he kind of like, and like, you know, it's like slight variations from each one. They're not like, you know, like it's not like completely different albums, but just like different track orders, different mixes, different, you know, takes and all that. But he finally like sent one that, you know, that he was happy with, and yeah, he put it out on his label, and yeah, it was crazy.
Before this though, Dälek was actually busy working on their third album, which is also highly regarded, Absence. It's mainly political rap and hardcore hip-hop with some really great tracks that are very long. They would also go on to collaborate with Zoo, an Italian band, to release an EP called Dälek vs Zoo. After that, they take another year to release another small EP called Streets All Amped, which is mainly just Will Brooks, and then their fourth album, Abandoned Language. There's not too much songs, but they are very long. Like, just look at the first one, Jesus. They would also release an EP called Dead vs Massive Volume 1, which is basically just a mix of collab songs and other tracks all put together into one place. Dead vs would go on to be the name of the record label that Will Brooks would start himself in 2008 to support other experimental bands and artists. From 2007 to 2009, they'd release some more EPs with other artists that are pretty hard to find before releasing their sixth album, Gutter Tactics. The first song is actually pretty short, mostly because it's an interlude track, but the rest of the songs are either really long or just around the normal length of a song. From 2009 to 2010 though, Joshua Booth would leave to complete his doctorate, and Aight relocated to Berlin in 2010. This would leave Will Brooks by himself, but the main two would work together one last time for an album simply called Untitled that was basically just like one whole track. There is no names for the actual songs within the album unless you count calling it Untitled, but after that, the two would split from there. Not for anything serious or drama related, they simply just wanted to go into different paths and felt like now was a good time. Will would go on to do a couple of things alone, although he said in an interview that Octo and him scored a film together, but I can't really find the movie they're talking about. But later he would release an album called Takeover under a new name or group, Dead vs Massive. He would also go on to release another album under the name Icon A-Class and then do some other things too, but they're not really relevant. In 2013, Will would perform a few songs from Dälek during a tour, which made him realize that, damn, I kinda miss this. Now the other members were already doing their own thing, so he instead chose to bring in longtime worker DJ Rec and then Mike Manteca to finally bring back Dälek in 2016 with the release of a new album, Asphalt for Eden, and a single named Molten. The comeback features a lot of songs here that are also pretty long, but it's a pretty good listen in my opinion. A year later, they would release Endangered Philosophies, which is much longer and okay, I guess. Sometime later, they'd release an EP in 2019 called Respect to the Authors as they worked on their next album. But of course, in 2020, that happened, and so the project would be put on pause for a few years. While everyone was still in quarantine though, Will Brooks still kinda wanted to keep making music, so DJ Rec recommended him to do DJing on Twitch instead. His mixes would go on to be part of a short series he named Meditation when someone in the chat asked where he could buy his music, and Will Brooks was like, oh yeah, I can do that. So now it's just here in Bandcamp to buy. There's also Live from Deadverse Studios, but that's kinda whatever. Once COVID was finally done with, he would go back through his track list and tweak some things, add some songs, before releasing it as Precipice in 2022. They wouldn't really do much after that, except release a collab single with King Garbage in 2023, but sometime later in 2025, they would collab with Charles Hayward, who was another experimental artist, to release their collab album, not EP this time. And for when this video is released, they're currently working on Brilliance of a Falling Moon, that album coming out in March 27th. Now, as you can tell, they've made a lot of music in the past 25 years, and although I can't say I've listened to everything, I've listened to enough of their albums to know that Dälek Untitled, I wouldn't say it marked a major shift since this was done in absence, but they would usually start to focus a lot more on tracks just fading into each other. Gutter Tactics made this more obvious, and instrumentally, it's okay. Lyrically though, you can tell that Will is doing a lot. He goes deep into what happened to black political activists, and on the cover art, you can see the outlines of said activists. Asphalt for Eden was their comeback track in 2016 with the new guys, and I'd recommend this one too, mostly because it's a quick listen and it does have a nice blend of good music and meaningful lyricism, having bars that felt way ahead of its time for 2016. The last song, by the way, feels like the complete opposite of Kendrick Lamar's Alright in 2015. The next few albums are okay. It's very ambient and the lyrics are sometimes hard to hear, but if you want experimental that isn't in your face, then maybe check out the new albums. The single for the new album though sounds promising, but other than that, that's where the group is at currently. They started with a blazing fire and kept it warm and stable for the years to come. So with all that in mind, their history, their music, their legacy, I ask again, were Death Grips inspired by Dälek? If we had to go back to the start of hip hop and rap, we'd know that it originally came from taking the funkiest part of an existing record and keeping the rhythm of that into a full-on song. Will Brooks, being a kid from the 70s and 80s, most likely saw this all happen in real time and took that idea to heart in his music. What made experimental hip hop experimental is, funnily enough, what made hip hop music in the first place. Pulling from other genres wasn't anything new. The only difference today is that not much people are doing it anymore. Will Brooks came to Octopus and shared their love of music, despite coming from different genres, and decided to make their own style. Stefan Burnett used to be a rapper in a group simply called Fire, and would meet his neighbor, that was a drummer, Zach Hill, where they both shared their love of music and would go on to make their own kind of sound after finding another partner. Danny Brown is an alternative rapper that listens to all kinds of music, from metal in the 2000s to now hyperpop 20 years later. Daniel Dumoulin, when talking about Mad Villainy, shared that he never really listened to rap and preferred jazz he heard at home. Despite this though, he would go on to work with Madlib and create one of the greatest rap albums of all time. Even Kendrick Lamar, who I know is a mainstream rapper, still experiments in his music, like on Mr. Around the Big Steppers and To Pimp a Butterfly. So when asking experimental rappers who their influences are, it can feel a bit weird to think that it would be from other experimental rappers, judging from how varied their tastes would be. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure Death Grips inspired a lot of rappers, but what I'm trying to get at here is that everything influences anything you make in art. It doesn't matter if they're different genres, different art forms, it can be really anything that you think about in your day-to-day life. True creativity and the beauty of hip-hop is taking two completely different things and putting it together. People have called him experimental for the longest time, or never considered Dälek as an actual hip-hop group, but to him, they couldn't be more wrong. To me, hip-hop was about experimentation. It was about being into all types of different music, digging through crates, finding records, finding samples. So I think you always have to have an open mind and an open ear. Look at Africa Bambaataa sampling Kraftwerk. If you didn't have an open ear, that wouldn't have existed, you know what I mean? So to that degree, I think that's why we feel that what we do might be one of the purest forms of hip-hop right now, because it's so experimental in nature. the way hip hop was intended to be. With that in mind, it's hard to say what experimental rapper influenced who, because they all do. Experimenting is, and always was, a fundamental part of hip-hop, and so, by definition, experimental hip-hop will always be hip-hop, no matter how else you look at it. And although Death Grips get a lot of praise for their influence of sound, we shouldn't forget that Dalek was also greatly influential in pioneering the genre, and keeping the soul of what hip-hop was originally, experimental.
I mean, the best way I could put it is that this project has always been how I get all my anger, my frustration, like everything I want to say, I get it out that way. So really it's been more therapy for me than anything. I'm always humbled that other people find meaning in what I've written, in the songs that we do, and I think that's the beautiful thing about music, is that it connects people, you know, from all different types of cultures all around the world. Obviously, in the world that we're living today, I think my messages have gotten a little more like, you know, like club to the head, just to reiterate what I've been saying for the last 25 years. But yeah, you know, I mean, like the messages are there. At the same time, I want people to do a little thinking for themselves, and I want them to kind of discover them themselves. It's not about me telling you how to think. It's more about me presenting how I think, and if you agree with me, then nod your head with me.
But anyways, that's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. There is an extended video of this that includes extra information and more of a discussion on their music by actually using the more popular tracks. I left it out because of, you know, copyright. But if you want to support me and watch the longer cuts, as well as some other videos that'll come out later, then I definitely recommend joining my membership. It's only $7.50 a month for longer content, members only live streams, members only posts. But yeah, that's there if you want more. I'd also recommend just listening to their music too, since I really enjoy them, but that's basically it. Thanks.